Yeah, I'm very curious to see what the Leafs do. It's going to be a very, very busy Friday. You know what? We were going to go to some of the trade targets. We'll talk about that in a sec, but I want to jump ahead to Elias Pettersson because obviously it's the talk everywhere. He had this, it's funny. I don't know how you guys view this stuff in Toronto, but like here in Vancouver, like Pettersson had this like really good media scrum yesterday, which is like very unheard of. Like he was taking accountability. He was like, I take back what I said about blaming the media, and he seemed like lighter. That's sort of the way that everyone's described it. Like he's always seemed tense this season, talking about anything. It's like, I don't want to talk about JT Miller. I don't want to talk about all this stuff. But yesterday he was like, you know what? I'm not playing well. I think the big thing is like, because Frank was on Sportsnet 650 yesterday and he was talking about how, just like every GM's thinking the same thing. Like if you're trying to acquire this guy, like, is he like this forever? Like no one knows. Like the Canucks are in a very, very, very tough spot here. There's a thought that I actually want to get your thoughts as an outsider on this. There's this conspiracy theory out there. Maybe it's not a conspiracy theory, but I kind of take it that way, that he is hurt, that he's playing injured, that he's one of these guys that is afraid to sort of speak up. And the Canucks medical staff, let's be honest, has not had a great track record overall. You look at the Mikheyev injury where he played through the season. They had the issue years ago with Tanner Pearson. I know that was a different medical staff, but you're seeing with Quinn Hughes, Thatcher Demko, there's all these injuries that have popped up here. Do you think it's a case that he is really injured and that just the team's basically like, you got to suck it up? Or do you think it's more mental and he just like, because the thing is, like, people thought maybe at the Four Nations he would play better, but he played exactly the same. So it's obviously not like an environment thing or a coaching thing. I know people also said that Rick Tocchet has been known in the past to, sort of hinder players' careers. Logan Cooley, when he was coaching him in Phoenix, there was this whole thing about, or Arizona, I should say, where it was like, that he wasn't playing as well because of Tocchet's system. I think it's pretty obvious. I think it's a mix of both. I think there is an injury there, and I think there's something mental. But I'm curious as an outsider, what's your take on the Pettersson situation?
Well, we saw the thing about last year where he was playing through injuries for the playoffs. And it's like, you look at last year, it was a big point fall compared to the previous year when he had 102 points. He still had nearly 90 points, though. Like, it wasn't like he played bad during the regular season. Obviously, playoffs are a different story. You look at him this year, a lot of this, to me, screams of a player who's just playing with no confidence. And goal scoring has never been, like, his absolute best, like, feature, but he's still usually good for 30 goals a year. Like, this year, he's might get 15. Like that's a big drop off. To me, a lot of that's looking at like, okay, the Canucks have had their turmoil this year. There's been a lot of talk about the future there, but like it seemed like it doesn't seem matter who he plays with. He's not clicking. I feel like it's a guy that you see him, that you can see the frustration at points where he's just missing the net, not getting dangerous shots. Like he's not playing with that confidence. And for a goal scorer, that is so important. You need to be able to go out there and feel confident in yourself. Like you need to be confident to be an NHL player, but there's two positions where it matters, or two situations that matters the most. If you are a goal scorer and if you're a goaltender. A goaltender, you start overthinking yourself, every shot goes in. Goal scorer, you got to believe that you're going to score in every single shot. When you don't, it starts to get in your head. We've seen it with Patrick Laine. We've seen that with younger players where they're not scoring and things aren't working out. And yeah, I do feel like he's not as quick as he was before. I feel like he's not as engaged. Like he's never been someone to be that physical. Like you look at the penalty minute totals, they're very low every year, but it feels like, at least from an outsider, it feels like he's not going into the boards and battling as hard as he could. It feels like he's just keeping it simple, not trying to get hurt. For me, I've said pretty much since November or December, like sit him for like 2 weeks. I know now with the playoff coming up, it's a little bit different. That's why I said they should have done earlier.
Should have done it when Miller was out. Or they gave Miller 10 days off. I don't know why they never did it with Pettersson. It's just crazy to me, right?
Just give him a chance to reset. Say, hey man, do not watch a hockey game. Don't do anything. Go to a beach, do something to take your mind off of this. Like go out there and reset. I say that as someone who hates like going places, and I don't take much vacation because I just don't want to necessarily. But for a NHL player, like you need these guys to be sharp and ready to go. We're not seeing that from him. And the more it drags on, the worse it's going to be on him. And so, yeah, it was good to see kind of some accountability for his play, but I don't think he's like this going to be this down player the rest of his career. I don't think that 102-point season a few years ago is a fluke. I think he's still capable of it. I just think he needs a reset. And I don't know if that takes in the summer of just don't train or anything. Just keep it simple, stay in shape, but don't go out there and spend a lot of time trying to reinvent your game. Like just come back knowing that next year you got to be better. And that I think he will be better.
Yeah, and I bring this up, and people are, why are you bringing this up on a trade deadline show? There's been talks of trades, or at least that there's a thought that the Canucks should unload him, and because they don't want this being Louis Eriksson all over again, or what Calgary was dealing with for a year and a bit with Jonathan Huberdeau. Like, you don't want to be the situation where you have this, distressed asset that's making like crazy money. But yeah, like, to me, they haven't exhausted all options. Let Pettersson rest. Let him figure this out on his own. And then, he reads the headlines. That in that scrum yesterday, he was talking about how, I definitely got to shoot more or something. And he's like, oh, great. I hope that's not another headline. Like, he reads everything, you can tell. And I think that's what's wearing on him too. And it would be great if he could just, I don't know, like, just get all the apps off his phone and just, focus on hockey and just, get back to doing it. The problem now is, like, they're fighting for a playoff spot. And I think if you ask most Canucks fans, they would rather them figure this thing out with Pettersson and let, rest these guys or whatever, because let's be honest here, even if the Canucks make it in, they're going to play one of the best teams in the Western Conference. And most likely they're not even going to win a game or two, just with, they don't have Demko. There's all these factors sort of going against it there. So I think it's like, but the owner, it seems, wants to make the playoffs and get that playoff revenue. And I think most fans are like, no, we don't want to see that. Sticking with the Canucks, as far as trade targets, we did hear a report yesterday that maybe there's some action between Pius Suter and the Dallas Stars. Farhan Lalji, though, coming out yesterday and saying that it appears that Suter will be playing tonight against Anaheim. I got to think that, like, what sort of the rumblings are right now are that the Canucks are basically, if they're not going to get good offers, they're going to basically use these guys as rentals, and that includes Brock Boeser. Are you getting any sense from Vancouver in terms of any, movement there? Because I think a lot of fans do want to see them sell, and even if it means, losing a center and bringing up like an Atu Ratu.
I don't want them to move on from Brock Boeser. I'll just say that, man. Like,
okay,
that's a guy who
truly
wants to be a Canuck, it seems like. And I feel like you're going to have a hard time. Like, both him and Pettersson, if you were to trade either of them, like, their value is not too high right now. So you'd be giving up a player who's so valuable for nothing, basically. Like, you look at this team the last couple of years, you going back to like that COVID run a couple of years ago where they made some noise in the bubble. And then you look at, last year, if Demko was fully healthy, like, I thought they could have beat the Edmonton Oilers. I don't think this is a terrible hockey team. There's been a lot of things going against them. Like, you look at Dakota Joshua missing the start of the year, and Thatcher Demko missing.
He hasn't played well this season either, no. Joshua either. But understandable, but it's something that does need to be pointed out, right?
Yeah. That's a guy you really were hoping to do a lot more. Obviously, health issues kind of got in the way there, which is tough. Like, Kiefer Sherwood was a nice little bonus guy, a very good guy in fantasy hockey, man. I'm facing a guy with him. I hate that.
Do you get hits points? Because I think he's leading the league in hits right now.
Oh yeah,
right?
So yeah,
okay, there you go. Yeah, great.
I'm facing that guy right now. But like, you miss all the time with Quinn Hughes. You miss the time with the Roenick. Like, this is a team that's had hit after hit after hit. If this group can stay healthy, and that's easier said than done. The Canucks know that. No team knows that better than the Columbus Blue Jackets. I swear, the last couple of years, they're always like leading the league in games missed. But with the Canucks here, I think there's enough talent to, if you keep the core together and you just sell off pieces like Pius Suter and sell these guys off who probably aren't going to come back anyways type thing, that makes more sense to me. I think Boeser should be there next year. I think Pettersson should be there next year, and just go with it. And I do question if Kevin Lankinen is the real answer in net, but the fact that gave him that contract when they already have Demko says a lot about how they're feeling right now. So,
well, I think it says that they can't trust Demko at this point because he hasn't been healthy and he hasn't been to the form that he's been before. And I think Lankinen gives you decent enough goaltending. You'll never get Demko goaltending out of Kevin Lankinen, but I think it's enough where, because let's be honest, as someone who watches the Canucks a lot, like, if you don't have Lankinen in net, let's say they never even got Lankinen and they went with Yuri Patera, who they signed from Vegas, and Arthur Silovs, there's no way the Canucks would be anywhere near the playoffs. They've had games. That's the weird thing. As bad as they played, it could have been even worse if they didn't have decent goaltending. Like, for the most part, they've had like really stellar goaltending from a guy in Kevin Lankinen, who, by the way, is making league minimum this year. It's crazy that all these, like, you think of the Oilers, they didn't even take a stab at a guy like Lankinen and how different maybe things could be on their end. Not that goaltending's their only problem, but I think that it's just that's one thing I think people don't look at. And also, if you look at some of the losses that the Canucks have had, some of those games that they're losing, at least especially on this road trip, there has been some bad goaltending there. And I think that is sort of putting all the other issues that they have to the surface, because I think they have gotten away. Like the LA game last week, They got great goaltending from Lankinen, and that's something that I think fans and just media and everyone kind of get too used to that, and they don't see the glaring issues on the team, which is a lack of scoring, lack of shots, and all that. So that's something interesting. One thing I wanted to ask you about Boeser, and then we'll move on from the Canucks. I don't just want to talk about the Canucks the whole time. I think the concern is the term, right? Like, I think Boeser, and I don't blame him, this is the time he's going to get the best contract he'll ever get. He wants like an 8-year deal like JT Miller had. I don't think the issue is the price. I think it's the term, where I think there's some concerns about the skating, right? Like, if you look at players that you sign to long-term deals that aren't good skaters, those sort of dwindle as time goes on. What do you make of that argument? Because I know, I can tell you're a big Boeser fan, and I think, I get that argument, but I think there's some concern with the skating.
Yeah, no question about it. Like, I think you look at him, it's been hard to really judge how good of a player he could be, because when he got 40 goals last year, the running joke was like, this was the guy that was always a 40 goal scorer without actually being a 40 goal scorer, because there was always so much talk about how good of a goal scorer he could be, and just never really kind of took that next step there. With him, yeah, the lack of speed and the subpar skating like that at 28 years old, that's not being reinvented. Like, he's not going to suddenly become this quick guy. You could see that from an 18 to a 20-year-old, but you're not seeing that from 28 years old. I think with him, again, it's just like, this is a guy that you want scoring, and he can do it. And you still look at the fact that he's not scoring as much, but he's second in goals on the team. Like, he's still going out there and doing that work. He's still productive. So again, that's a guy that, the length of the contract might be tough, but at the same time, like, he's a guy you just don't want to leave, because you're not going to be able to fill that in an effective way. I think that's the problem. Like, it's not going to be, you're not getting a Brock Boeser guy on the free agent market. So you have him, keep him if you can, but that's just my opinion. I know a lot of Canucks fans will say differently, but
no. I like hearing this. I think the one area where I'd push back is I think it's easier to find wingers. Granted, you won't get wingers that score as much as he does, right? But I think wingers are easier to find on the open market than, say, like a center or like right shot defenseman or something. So I think there's a thought that you can somewhat replace him. And like, if you got like a veteran that could do half of what Brock does for a season more, and then you got Lekramaki, who I think they're hoping will be the right winger to eventually fill his shoes, I could see that move going. But here's the thing. I wouldn't just give up Boeser for nothing. Like, I'd almost rather Boeser walk than trade him for nothing. And then like you get like if you're getting like a 2nd round pick, I don't think that's really worth it. Or even, well, maybe second, but like that's kind of where I would weigh the options a little bit. Not to mention something we haven't even talked about here, which I think does impact the trade deadline a lot. And you know better than me, it's not a very strong draft this year, right? So that's another thing I think teams have to factor in.
Yeah, it's not a great draft, but it's also not a great free agency market. If you assume Mitch Marner signs with the Leafs, then there's Mikko Rantanen, who like either is going to sign with the Hurricanes or they're going to trade him, it seems like. Then you're looking at Nikolai Ehlers. Well, Ehlers has struggled to stay healthy the last couple of years, a bit hot and cold. Then you're looking at probably Brock Boeser being the next best winger at that point. So you're not going to be able to find like Claude Giroux. Claude Giroux is like going to be 37 on his next contract. He's not going to be as good. So that's my concern about getting rid of Boeser. It's like, how are you going to fill that need? Because you're not going to get that in a trade here at the trade deadline. So then you look at the free agent market. Well, it's, again, if you can't get Marner and you can't get Rantanen, I don't know where you get those goals from. So Marner,
you bring it, and for a team that's struggling to score and has had all these issues, and you haven't replaced JT Miller. Like, by the way, Cheadle's been a great acquisition. I don't know if you've been paying attention, but he's been such a good fit, and I like the fact that he's getting more of an opportunity in Vancouver to show what he's made of. Obviously, the big elephant in the room is the health, but if he can stay healthy, I think that trade's worked out great. And the defensive prospect they got in Mancini seems like there's a lot of excitement there, because that's the one thing during the Jim Benning era, there was no pipeline whatsoever, and now, like, to their credit, as much as Alvin and Rutherford have made some very questionable moves, they have created a good pipeline, which is interesting.
I'll throw one more name out there.
Yeah,
could you imagine Brad Marchand on the Canucks?
I can't imagine a world that would. Dude, it was even hard for me to like watch the Four Nations and like cheer for There's still 2011, man. There's still a lot of the scars go deep on that one with all that, but.